Most folks in Oakmont, Ohio, thought Sam Crawford was just another struggling single father and mechanic, working 16-hour days to keep his garage afloat and put food on the table for his 12-year-old daughter, Chloe. What they didn't know was that beneath those grease-stained coveralls lived a mechanical genius who once designed engines for professional racing teams. When wealthy racing enthusiast Vincent Stone walked into Crawford's auto repair that July morning and made what seemed like an impossible bet: transform a worthless junkyard car into a competitive racer in 30 days for $10,000, Sam should have walked away. Instead, he accepted a challenge that would reveal hidden talents, uncover long-buried secrets, and show an entire community that sometimes the most extraordinary miracles come from the most unlikely places. This is the story of how a pile of scrap metal became a racing legend, and how one man's desperate gamble shocked everyone at Oakwood Racing Circuit in ways nobody saw coming. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun cast long shadows across Sycamore Lane as Sam Crawford wiped the sweat from his brow with a grease-stained rag. The July heat was already building, promising another scorching day in Oakmont. His small auto repair shop stood wedged between Martinez Hardware and Rosa's Cafe, its faded sign barely visible through the grime that seemed to accumulate faster than he could clean it. The garage bay doors were rolled up, revealing the cramped interior where 3 vehicles waited for his attention: a rusted pickup truck with transmission problems, an old sedan with a blown gasket, and Mrs. Peterson's ancient station wagon that made sounds no car should ever make. Sam ducked under the hood of the pickup truck, his weathered hands moving with practiced precision as he examined the transmission fluid. At 38, his face carried the lines of a man who'd seen too much disappointment, but his eyes still held the sharp intelligence that once made him one of the most sought-after automotive engineers in the Midwest. Those days felt like a lifetime ago, before his wife Sarah's illness, before the medical bills, before everything fell apart and left him rebuilding his life one oil change at a time. "Dad, you forgot to pack my lunch again." The voice belonged to Chloe, his 12-year-old daughter, who stood in the doorway connecting the garage to their small apartment above. Her dark hair was pulled back in a ponytail, and she wore a summer dress that was getting too small for her growing frame. She held up an empty lunch bag with the patient expression of someone who'd learned to take care of details that adults sometimes missed. "Sorry, kiddo," Sam called out, not looking up from the engine. "There's sandwich stuff in the fridge. Make yourself whatever you want." Chloe disappeared back into the apartment, her footsteps echoing on the wooden stairs. Sam felt the familiar pang of guilt that accompanied most of their interactions these days. He was trying his best, but being both father and mother while running a struggling business left little time for the kind of attention a 12-year-old deserved. Sarah had been the organized one, the planner who remembered lunches and permission, slips and all the small details that made a house feel like a home. The bell above the shop door chimed, and Sam emerged from under the hood to see a man in an expensive suit examining the garage with obvious distaste. Vincent Stone was everything Sam wasn't. Tall, impeccably dressed, with the kind of confidence that came from never having to worry about money. His silver hair was perfectly styled despite the heat, and his Italian leather shoes had probably cost more than Sam made in a month. "Are you the owner of this establishment?" Vincent asked, his voice carrying the clipped tones of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Sam Crawford," Sam replied, wiping his hands on his coveralls. "What can I do for you?" Vincent pulled out his phone and showed Sam a photograph of a sleek red sports car. "This is my Ferrari 458. It's been making an unusual noise, and my regular mechanic in Columbus is booked for the next 3 weeks. Someone at the country club mentioned you might be able to take a look." Sam studied the photo, his mind automatically cataloging potential issues. "What kind of noise?" When does it happen? During acceleration? Braking? Turning? A grinding sound. When I shift into third gear, Vincent said, but his attention had already wandered to the cluttered workbench and oil-stained floor. Though I'm beginning to doubt whether this place has the proper equipment to work on a vehicle of that caliber. The dismissive tone hit Sam like a slap. He'd heard it countless times over the past few years. The assumption that because his shop was small and shabby, he couldn't possibly understand sophisticated machinery. People saw the surface and made judgments, never bothering to look deeper. I've worked on Ferraris before, Sam said quietly. Probably more than your regular mechanic. Vincent's eyebrows rose skeptically. Really? And where was this? At another garage like this one? Sam's jaw tightened. He could have mentioned his years designing engines for racing teams, his engineering degree from Ohio State, the patents he still held on transmission improvements that were used in high-end sports cars around the world. Instead, he simply said, I know my way around Italian engines. I find that difficult to believe, Vincent said, his voice taking on a mocking edge. No offense, but this place looks like it specializes in rust buckets and farm equipment. A Ferrari requires a certain level of expertise and precision that what? Sam interrupted, his patience finally wearing thin. That someone like me couldn't possibly have. Vincent shrugged, as if the answer was obvious. Look around you, Crawford. This isn't exactly the kind of operation that inspires confidence when dealing with a $200,000 automobile. The words hung in the air between them, loaded with assumptions and prejudice. Sam felt his hands clench into fists, but before he could respond, Chloe appeared in the doorway again, this time carrying her packed lunch and school backpack. Dad, I'm walking to summer camp, she announced. Mrs. Rodriguez said she'd give me a ride home if you're still working late. Sam's anger deflated slightly as he looked at his daughter. She was growing up too fast, becoming too independent because he couldn't always be there when she needed him. The bills kept piling up, the business barely broke even most months, and now this pompous rich man was standing in his garage, acting like Sam was some kind of incompetent fool. Have a good day, sweetheart, Sam said, forcing a smile. I'll try to be done by dinner. Chloe kissed his cheek and headed out the front door, leaving Sam alone with Vincent Stone and the weight of his own frustration. Vincent watched the girl, leave with the detached interest of someone observing a mildly curious phenomenon. Single father? Vincent asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. That's right. Must be challenging trying to raise a child while running a business like this, especially when the business doesn't seem to be thriving. Sam's temper flared again. My personal life is none of your concern. You want your Ferrari looked at or not? Vincent smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Actually, I've changed my mind. I think I'll wait for my regular mechanic to have an opening. But I'll tell you what, I'm curious about something. You seem to think you're capable of working on sophisticated machinery. How confident are you in those abilities? Confident enough. Confident enough to put your money where your mouth is. Sam studied Vincent's face, sensing a trap, but unable to see where it was leading. What are you talking about? Vincent walked over to the garage bay doors and looked out at Sycamore Lane, his gaze taking in the modest shops and working-class neighborhood. I'm part of a racing enthusiast group that meets every month. We often make friendly wagers on various automotive challenges. Nothing serious, just a way to keep things interesting. And, well, I was thinking about your claim that you understand sophisticated machinery. It got me wondering, if someone gave you a real challenge, how would you perform? Sam's instincts screamed warning, but his pride was still stinging from Vincent's earlier comments. What kind of challenge? Vincent turned back to face him, his smile growing wider. There's a junkyard about 10 miles outside town, Thunderbird Scrap, I believe it's called, full of cars that nobody wants, vehicles that are beyond repair. What if someone were to go there, pick any car they wanted, and try to turn it into something capable of competing in a real race? That's impossible. Junkyard cars are usually stripped for parts or completely rusted out. Exactly, Vincent said, his voice taking on the tone of someone explaining a joke to a slow child. Which is why it would be such an interesting challenge. Of course, it would have to be a legitimate race, with real competitors and proper oversight. Nothing amateur. Sam felt his pulse quicken despite himself. What kind of race? The Oakwood Racing Circuit hosts monthly amateur events. Nothing too serious, just local enthusiasts and weekend warriors. But the cars have to pass safety inspections, and the competition is real enough. The next event is in exactly 30 days. The pieces of Vincent's proposal began to fall into place, and Sam realized he was being maneuvered into something that could only end badly. You're talking about taking a junkyard car and getting it ready to race in 30 days. I'm talking about putting your confidence to the test. You claim to understand sophisticated machinery. Prove it. Take any car from that junkyard and turn it into something that can compete at Oakwood. If you can do it, if you can actually finish the race without breaking down, I'll pay you $10,000. Sam's breath caught. $10,000 would solve most of his immediate problems. The overdue rent, the stack of bills on his kitchen table, maybe even enough left over to buy Chloe some new clothes for school. But 30 days to transform a junkyard wreck into a racing car? It sounded impossible. And if I can't do it? Vincent's smile turned predatory. Then you admit that you're exactly what you appear to be, a small-town mechanic who's in over his head. No shame in that, Crawford. We all have limitations. The challenge hung between them, like a gauntlet thrown down on medieval ground. Sam knew he should walk away, should recognize the bet for what it was, a rich man's game, designed to humiliate someone he saw as beneath him. But the money was real, and so was the implication that Sam wasn't capable of something extraordinary. $10,000 if I can get a junkyard car ready to race in 30 days. If you can get it ready and actually compete. The car has to pass inspection, complete at least half the race distance, and you have to drive it yourself. No help from professional teams, no expensive equipment you can't afford on your own. Sam thought about Chloe walking to summer camp, because he couldn't afford to send her to the better programs across town. He thought about the stack of overdue notices that kept him awake at night, and the way people like Vincent Stone looked at him, like he was a failure who'd never amount to anything. You're serious about this? Completely serious. Though I understand if you'd rather not take the risk. Like I said, we all have limitations. The words were carefully chosen, designed to sting and provoke. Sam recognized the manipulation, but felt powerless to resist it. His pride, his desperation, and his deeply buried belief that he was capable of more than his current circumstances suggested all combined into a moment of reckless decision-making. "All right," Sam heard himself say, "you've got a bet." Vincent's grin was triumphant. "Excellent. I'll draw up the paperwork this afternoon and have it delivered tomorrow. The terms will be exactly as we discussed. 30 days. Any car from Thunderbird scrap, and you have to compete at Oakwood Racing Circuit. This should be very entertaining." He turned and walked toward the door, pausing only to add, "Oh, and Crawford, I hope you don't disappoint your daughter when this goes exactly the way we both know it will." The door chimed as Vincent left, and Sam stood alone in his garage, the magnitude of what he'd just agreed to settling over him like a heavy blanket. 30 days to accomplish the impossible, with $10,000 and his reputation on the line. He looked around at his modest shop, at the tools that were good but not great, at the evidence of a life that had shrunk to fit circumstances he'd never intended. For the first time in years, Sam Crawford felt something stirring inside him that had nothing to do with desperation and everything to do with the possibility that maybe, just maybe, he was capable of something extraordinary after all. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The paperwork arrived the next morning with a courier who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else than standing in front of Crawford's auto repair. Sam signed for the thick manila envelope, noting the expensive letterhead and legal firm address stamped across the top. Vincent Stone wasn't taking any chances. This was a binding contract, complete with penalty clauses and specific performance requirements that made Sam's stomach twist as he read through them. Kyle Gonzalez arrived for work an hour later, his youthful energy a sharp contrast to Sam's brooding mood. At 22, Kyle had the kind of optimism that hadn't yet been worn down by repeated disappointments. He'd been working at the garage for 8 months, eager to learn, and surprisingly, talented with engines, though his formal training was limited to what he'd picked up at the community college. "Morning, boss," Kyle called out, grabbing his coveralls from the hook by the door. "You look like someone stole your coffee. Everything okay?" Sam folded the contract and shoved it into his back pocket. "We need to talk about something that's either going to save this business or destroy what's left of my reputation." Kyle's expression shifted from casual to concerned. "That sounds serious." "It is." Sam gestured toward the small office area where he kept his desk and filing cabinets. "Sit down. I need to tell you about something I did yesterday, and then I need your help deciding whether I've lost my mind." For the next 20 minutes, Sam explained the encounter with Vincent Stone, the humiliating assumptions, and the bet that now, legally, bound him to attempt the impossible. Kyle listened without interruption, his eyes growing wider as the full scope of the challenge became clear. 30 days, Kyle finally said. "Boss, that's crazy. I mean, I've seen you work miracles with engines that other mechanics gave up on, but a junkyard car, racing condition, that's not just crazy, it's impossible." That's what I thought too, but the money. 10 grand would solve a lot of problems, Kyle agreed. But what happens if you can't do it? What's the penalty? Sam pulled out the contract and pointed to a specific clause. Public acknowledgement that I was wrong about my abilities. Vincent gets to publish the results in the local paper and racing magazines. Basically, he gets to humiliate me professionally. Kyle whistled low. He really wants to see you fail. The question is whether I'm going to give him that satisfaction, and whether I can ask you to help me with something this risky. Kyle was quiet for a long moment, staring at the contract. What kind of help are we talking about? I can't pay you extra. Business barely covers your regular salary as it is. But if we're going to do this, I need someone who knows engines and isn't afraid of hard work. Someone willing to spend nights and weekends on a project that might not work. And if it does work, if we actually pull this off, Sam managed a small smile, then you get to say you helped build a race car from scratch. That's the kind of experience that looks good on a resume when you're ready to move on to bigger shops. Kyle stood up and walked to the window, looking out at Sycamore Lane, where the morning traffic was picking up. A school bus rumbled past, followed by pickup trucks heading to construction sites and factory workers driving cars that had seen better decades. This was Oakmont, honest, hard-working, and forgotten by the people who made decisions in boardrooms and country clubs. You know what really bugs me about this? Kyle said. It's not that the bet is impossible. It's that this Vincent Stone guy thinks he already knows everything about you based on what your shop looks like. He doesn't know about the racing engines you designed, or the fact that you can diagnose problems other mechanics miss, or that you rebuilt Mrs. Patterson's transmission with parts you machined yourself because the originals weren't available. Any more? How do you know about the racing engines? Kyle turned back with a sheepish expression. I looked you up online after my first week here. Found some old articles from Racing Engineering magazine. Samuel Crawford, lead design engineer for Midwest Performance Systems. 3 patents on transmission improvements. Worked with some pretty famous racing teams before you moved back to Oakmont. Sam felt heat rising in his cheeks. That was a long time ago. Not that long. And designing engines is different from building cars, but the principles are the same. Plus, you've got something that fancy racing teams don't have. What's that? You've got nothing to lose and everything to prove. That's worth more than expensive equipment sometimes. Before Sam could respond, the front door chimed and Lucia Fernandez entered, carrying a covered plate that smelled like heaven. The owner of the diner 3 doors down. Lucia had been bringing Sam lunch whenever she noticed he was too busy to eat, which was most days. She was 45, with silver streaking her dark hair and the kind of warm smile that made people feel instantly welcome. "Buenos dias, Sam." "Kyle." She set the plate on the counter and pulled back the foil to reveal a steaming breakfast burrito with eggs, bacon, and peppers. "You missed breakfast again, and Chloe stopped by this morning saying you forgot to eat yesterday too." "That kid worries." "Too much," Sam said, but he accepted the plate gratefully. "What do I owe you?" "Nothing. Consider it an investment in keeping you healthy enough to fix my delivery truck when it breaks down again." Lucia noticed the contract on the desk and the serious expressions on both men's faces. "Am I interrupting something important?" Kyle looked at Sam, who shrugged. If they were really going to attempt this project, word would get around Oakmont. Soon enough, might as well start with someone they trusted. "Sam made a bet yesterday," Kyle said. "Tell her about Vincent Stone." As Sam recounted the story for the second time, Lucia's expression shifted from curiosity to indignation to something that looked like fierce determination. She knew the financial pressures Sam faced, had watched him struggle to balance fatherhood and business while maintaining his dignity in the face of mounting bills. "This man, this Vincent Stone," she said when Sam finished, "he thinks he's better than you because he has money." "He thinks he's better than all of us," Sam replied. "People like him see places like Oakmont as quaint curiosities. We're the supporting. Cast in their story, then you show him he's wrong. You take his money and you make him eat his words. It's not that simple, Lucia. 30 days to build a race car from junk. Even if it's possible, I don't have the resources for something like that." Lucia was quiet for a moment, then pulled out her phone and started scrolling through contacts. "My brother-in-law Rico works at the steel plant. He owes me a favor from when I catered his daughter's quinceañera. I bet he could help with metalwork if you need it." "Lucia, I can't ask people to—" "You're not asking. I'm offering. And I'm not the only one in this town who's tired of being looked down on by people with more money than sense." She found the contact she was looking for and started dialing. "Rico, it's Lucia. I need to talk to you about helping a friend with a project." Kyle watched the conversation with growing excitement. "Boss, she's right. This isn't just about you anymore. This is about showing people like Vincent Stone that they don't know everything." Sam felt a mix of gratitude and terror as he realized what was happening. The bet he'd made in a moment of wounded pride was becoming something bigger, involving people who had their own reasons for wanting to see an underdog succeed. The pressure was mounting, but so was the support, and for the first time since signing the contract, Sam began to think that maybe, just maybe, this insane project might actually be possible. Lucia finished her call and turned back to them with a satisfied expression. "Rico will meet us at Thunderbird Scrap this afternoon. He says Chester Brooks has been saving some interesting pieces over the years, cars that might have good bones underneath the rust." "You know Chet Brooks?" "Honey, I know everyone in this county. Chet's been running that junkyard for 30 years. And he's got an eye for vehicles with potential. He's also got a soft spot for people who remind him of his younger self." Sam looked at the contract, then at Kyle's eager face, then at Lucia's determined expression. 3 people against impossible. Odds with 30 days to prove that skill and heart could triumph over money and prejudice. It should have felt hopeless. Instead, for the first time in months, Sam Crawford felt something that might have been hope. "All right," he said, folding the contract and putting it away. "Let's go find ourselves a race car." The drive to Thunderbird. Scrap took them through the outskirts of Oakmont, past farms where corn was growing tall in the summer heat and abandoned factories that had once provided jobs for half the town. Kyle rode shotgun in Sam's pickup truck, while Lucia followed in her delivery van, all three of them nervous about what they might find. Thunderbird Scrap occupied 20 acres of rolling hills covered with automotive archaeology. Decades of vehicles that had reached the end of their useful lives, arranged in rough rows according to make and year. Chester Brooks had owned the place since before Sam was born, accumulating a reputation as someone who could find any part for any car, given enough time and patience. Chet himself emerged from a small trailer that served as his office, wiping his hands on a rag that might have been white sometime in the distant past. At 70, he moved with the careful deliberation of someone whose joints protested every morning, but his eyes were sharp and curious as he watched the unlikely trio approach. "Lucia Fernandez," he called out in greeting. "What brings you out to my little corner of paradise, and with company no less?" Chester Brooks meets Sam Crawford and Kyle Gonzalez. Sam's the mechanic I've been telling you about, the one who fixed my delivery truck when everyone else said it was hopeless. Chet studied Sam with the appraising look of someone who'd spent a lifetime evaluating both machines and the people who worked on them. "Crawford, I heard about you. Word is, you know your way around an engine." "I try," Sam said. "Mr. Brooks, I need to ask you about something that might sound crazy." "Son, I've been in the salvage business for 30 years. Crazy is my specialty." "What do you need?" Sam explained about the bet, the 30-day deadline, and the need to find a vehicle with enough potential to become competitive. Chet listened without comment, occasionally nodding or making small sounds of understanding. When Sam finished, the old man was quiet for a long moment. "Vincent Stone," Chet finally said. "I know that name. Rich fellow from the country club. Drives fancy cars and looks at people like us like we're something stuck to his shoe. That's the one. And he thinks you can't turn one of my cars into a racer? He thinks it's impossible." Chet's weathered face split into a grin that revealed teeth stained by decades of coffee and tobacco. "Well then, Mr. Crawford, let's go prove him wrong. I've got something back here that might interest you." Chester Brooks led them through the maze of rusted vehicles like a tour guide in a museum of automotive history. Pickup trucks from the 70s sat next to compact cars from the 80s, their paint faded and chrome pitted by decades of weather. Kyle kept stopping to examine interesting engines, while Lucia picked her way carefully through the uneven ground, avoiding puddles left by the previous night's rain. "Most folks see junk when they look at this place," Chet said, gesturing toward a row of muscle cars that had seen better days. "But I see potential. Every one of these vehicles was somebody's pride and joy once. They all have stories, and some of them still have fight left in them." They walked deeper into the yard, past sections organized by decade and manufacturer. Sam found himself cataloging the vehicles automatically, his engineer's mind assessing chassis strength, engine accessibility, and potential for modification. Most of what he saw confirmed his worst fears. Rust had eaten through critical structural elements, engines were seized from years of exposure, and anything valuable had long since been stripped by other customers. "Now this section here," Chet continued, stopping near a chain-link fence that separated a smaller area from the main yard. "This is my private collection. Cars I've been holding onto for special occasions or the right buyer." The gate was secured with a heavy padlock, but Chet produced a key ring that looked like it belonged in a medieval dungeon. Behind the fence sat perhaps 24 vehicles, and even at first glance, Sam could see these were different. The rust was surface level rather than structural. The bodies were mostly intact, and several still had their engines. "What's that one?" Kyle asked, pointing to a blue and white coupe that sat slightly apart from the others. Chet followed his gaze and smiled. 1972 Chevrolet Camaro Z28. Previous owner was a young man who thought he could handle more power than he actually could. Wrapped it around a tree about 15 years ago. The front end took the impact, but the engine and transmission were mostly protected. Sam approached the Camaro with growing interest. The front bumper was crumpled and the hood was badly dented, but the damage appeared to be confined to easily replaceable panels. The rear of the car was virtually untouched, and through the back window he could see bucket seats that, while faded, were still intact. "What kind of engine?" Sam asked, running his hand along the damaged fender. 350 small block, 4-barrel carburetor. The transmission is a Muncie 4-speed manual. Kid had just finished rebuilding both before his unfortunate encounter with the oak tree. Lucia watched Sam circle the car like a predator, evaluating prey. "You see something there?" "Maybe. The proportions are right for a racing car. Long hood, short deck, wide stance, and the Z28 package means it was built for performance from the factory." Sam knelt down and peered under the front end, noting that the frame rails appeared straight despite the cosmetic damage. "Mr. Brooks, would you mind if I took a closer look?" Chet produced another key and unlocked the Camaro's driver door. The hinges protested with a squeal of metal on metal, but the door opened fully. The interior smelled of mildew and old leather, but the basic structure was sound. Sam slid behind the wheel and tested the pedals, checked the sightlines, and imagined what it would feel like to pilot this machine around a racetrack. "The engine turns over by hand," Chet offered. "I checked it myself last spring. Compression seems good, though it'll need a complete rebuild if you want reliability." Kyle had found his way under the hood and was examining the engine bay with the enthusiasm of someone half his age discovering a new toy. "Boss, come look at this. The engine's definitely seized, but I can see the pistons through the carburetor intake. No obvious cracks in the block, and the headers look aftermarket, high-performance stuff." Sam joined Kyle under the hood, his excitement building as he assessed the mechanical possibilities. The engine bay was cramped but well organized, with quality components that suggested the previous owner had known what he was doing before his skills exceeded his judgment. "What about the suspension?" Sam asked Chet. Front end took some damage in the crash, but the rear suspension is mostly original. Heavy-duty springs and shocks, limited slip differential. Like I said, this was a serious performance car. Sam walked around to the back of the Camaro and knelt down to examine the rear axle and suspension components. The differential housing showed no signs of damage, and the rear springs appeared to have the kind of heavy-duty rating that would handle the stress of racing. Most importantly, the frame appeared to be straight, the kind of catastrophic structural damage that would make the project impossible was nowhere to be seen. "Mr. Brooks," Sam said, standing up and brushing dirt off his knees, "what would you want for this car?" Chet stroked his chin thoughtfully. "Well, that depends. You planning to restore it to original condition, or are you thinking about something more ambitious? Racing, full competition preparation. In that case, I'd say we need to talk about more than just the car itself. You're going to need parts, lots of them. Engine internals, suspension upgrades, safety equipment, the kind of specialized components that cost serious money at retail prices." Lucia stepped forward. "Chester, what are you thinking?" "I'm thinking that maybe it's time I got involved in something more interesting than selling water pumps and door handles. Sam, I've been collecting racing parts for 20 years, previous customers who started projects they never finished, estate sales from old racers, manufacturers' overstock that I bought cheap. I've got engine internals that would cost you thousands at Summit Racing, suspension components from cars that cost more than most people's houses. Sam felt his pulse quicken. And you'd be willing to make you a deal. You take the Camaro and whatever parts you need from my collection. In exchange, when you win that race and collect your $10,000, you pay me half. If you don't win, you don't owe me anything except a good story about how we tried. Kyle looked like he might faint from excitement. Boss, that's the deal of a lifetime. With real racing parts and Mr. Brooks's help, we might actually have a chance. Sam studied Chet's weathered face, looking for the catch that had to be hidden somewhere in such a generous offer. Why would you do that? You don't even know me. Son, I've been watching rich folks look down on working people my whole life. Had plenty of them come through here over the years, buying parts for their weekend toy cars and acting like I should be grateful for their business. This Vincent Stone character sounds like he needs to learn that money can't buy everything, and skill and determination still count for something. Lucia clapped her hands together. It's perfect. Sam gets his race car, Chester gets to stick it to another arrogant rich man, and Kyle gets the education of a lifetime. There's one more thing, Chet said, his expression growing serious. Building. A race car isn't just about the mechanical work. You need someone who understands racing, strategy, driving techniques, how to set up a car for different track conditions. I know someone who might be able to help with that part. Who? Friend of mine named Frankie Walsh, goes by Motor most of the time. He's been around racing longer than any of us, worked as a mechanic for some pretty famous drivers back in the day. Retired now, but he still knows more about making cars go fast than most people forget. Sam felt pieces falling into place with almost supernatural precision. The right car, the right parts, expert guidance. It was starting to feel less like an impossible dream and more like a legitimate project. Where would I find this Frankie Walsh? He's usually at Murphy's Tavern most afternoons, holding court at the corner table and telling stories about the old days. I'll give him a call, let him know you might be stopping by. Kyle was practically bouncing with excitement. Boss, this is really happening. We're actually going to build a race car. We're going to try, Sam corrected, but he couldn't keep the smile off his face. Mr. Brooks, if you're serious about this partnership, then I accept. But I want to be clear about something. This isn't just about the money anymore. If we're going to do this, we're going to do it right. That means safety equipment, proper preparation, and no shortcuts that could get someone hurt. Wouldn't have it any other way, Chet agreed. When do you want to get started? Tomorrow morning. I'll bring my tools and Kyle, and we'll assess exactly what we're working with. How long do you think it will take to get the car moved to my shop? I can have Rico bring his flatbed truck this afternoon, Lucia offered. He owes me that favor anyway, and this gives him a chance to see what kind of project he might be helping with. As they walked back toward the gate, Sam felt the familiar mixture of excitement and terror that accompanied any major decision. 24 hours ago, he'd been a struggling mechanic trying to make ends meet. Now he was committed to a project that would consume the next month of his life and potentially determine his family's future. Sam, Lucia said as they reached their vehicles, I need to ask you something. Are you doing this for the money, or are you doing this to prove Vincent Stone wrong? The question caught him off guard, forcing him to examine motivations he hadn't fully acknowledged. I started it for the money. Chloe needs things I can't afford, and $10,000 would solve a lot of problems. And now? Sam looked back at the Camaro, barely visible through the fence, but already transformed in his mind from a damaged relic into a potential racing machine. Now, it's about proving that being underestimated doesn't mean being defeated. Vincent Stone looked at me and saw exactly what he expected to see. A small-town mechanic who didn't matter. I want to show him how wrong he was. Kyle nodded enthusiastically. Plus, boss, think about what this means for the shop. If we pull this off, if we actually build a competitive race car from scratch, word is going to get around. People are going to know that Crawford's Auto Repair is capable of serious work. That's assuming we don't fail spectacularly and become the laughingstock of Central Ohio, Sam replied, but his tone was lighter than his words suggested. Chet locked the gate behind them and pocketed his keys. Son, I've been in the automotive business for 50 years. I've seen a lot of people attempt a lot of impossible things. Most of them fail because they're trying to prove something to someone else. The ones who succeed are usually trying to prove something to themselves. As they drove back toward Oakmont, Sam reflected on Chet's words. Maybe the old man was right. Maybe this project had less to do with Vincent Stone and more to do with rediscovering the part of himself that had once designed engines for racing teams and believed that engineering skill could overcome any obstacle. Either way, in less than 30 days, he was going to find out exactly what Sam Crawford was capable of accomplishing when everything was on the line. The Camaro arrived at Crawford's Auto Repair on Rico's flatbed at 6 in the morning, looking even worse in the harsh fluorescent lighting of the garage than it had in the forgiving shadows of the junkyard. Rico Fernandez turned out to be a compact, muscular man with calloused hands and the kind of steady demeanor that came from 20 years of working with molten steel. He and Kyle managed to winch the car off the truck and position it in the center bay, where it sat like a wounded animal waiting for surgery. Dios mio, Rico muttered, walking around the damaged front end. My sister-in-law didn't mention you were trying to resurrect the dead. Sam ran his hand along the crumpled hood, already visualizing the work ahead. The damage looks worse than it is. Most of this is cosmetic, sheet metal that can be replaced or straightened. The important parts are protected underneath. If you say so, but I'm glad Lucia talked me into helping before I saw what we were working with. Rico pulled out a measuring tape and began checking the alignment of the frame rails. The good news is the chassis appears straight, front impact pushed, everything back evenly instead of twisting the structure. Kyle had already removed the damaged hood and was peering into the engine bay with the focused intensity of a surgeon examining a patient. Boss, come look at this. The engine's definitely seized, but I think I found the problem. Sam joined him at the front of the car, where Kyle was pointing to the air intake. See that? Water damage. The kid probably tried to drive through a puddle that was deeper than he thought, sucked water into the cylinders through the air cleaner. Hydrolock, Sam agreed. That explains why the engine seized without obvious external damage. The pistons couldn't compress water, so something had to give. Can we fix it? We'll know more when we tear it down, but it's probably rebuilding from the ground up. New pistons, rings, possibly new connecting rods if they bent when the water hit. The block might be salvageable if we're lucky. Rico finished his measurements and rejoined them. Frame's good, but you're going to need significant metalwork on the front suspension. The impact bent both lower control arms, and I'm seeing stress fractures in the mounting points. Sam felt his first real moment of doubt since accepting the bet. Engine rebuilding was something he could handle in his sleep, but fabricating new suspension components required specialized equipment and skills he didn't possess. How much would it cost to have that kind of work done professionally? More than you can afford, Rico said bluntly, but I might be able to help with that part. The steel plant has a fabrication shop that's not always running at full capacity. Evenings and weekends, there's usually some... Rico shrugged. Lucia says you're good people, and she's never wrong about character. Besides, I've got a nephew who thinks he knows everything about cars because he watches racing on television. Be nice to show him what real automotive work looks like. Kyle had moved on to examining the interior, testing the operation of pedals, and checking the condition of the seat mounting points. The cockpit's in better shape than I expected. Driver's seat has some tears, but the frame is solid. We'll need racing harnesses anyway, so the original seat belts don't matter. Racing harnesses? Sam asked. 5-point safety systems, mandatory for any sanctioned competition, along with a roll cage, fire extinguisher, and about a dozen other safety requirements that Vincent Stone probably doesn't know we'll have to meet. Sam pulled out his phone and started making notes. The list of required modifications was growing longer by the minute, and each item represented time, money, and expertise they might not have. What else are we missing? Racing fuel cell instead of the stock gas tank, competition tires and wheels, engine modifications for reliability under racing conditions, transmission cooler, upgraded brakes. The list goes on. Rico whistled softly. Sounds like you're building a completely different car, using this one as a starting point. That's exactly what we're doing, Sam replied. The question is whether we can accomplish it in 29 days. The morning passed quickly as they systematically dismantled the front end of the Camaro, cataloging damage and making lists of required parts. The work was therapeutic in a way. Problems with clear solutions, obstacles that could be overcome with enough effort and ingenuity. By lunchtime, they had the engine pulled and mounted on a stand, where it looked simultaneously promising and terrifying. Lucia arrived with sandwiches and cold drinks, just as Kyle was attempting to turn the crankshaft by hand. Any progress? We're learning what we're up against, Sam replied diplomatically. The engine needs a complete rebuild, the front suspension requires fabrication work, and we haven't even started on the racing safety equipment. But it's doable. Sam looked at the disassembled car, then at Kyle's determined expression and Rico's practical confidence. Ask me again in a week. They were interrupted by the arrival of a battered pickup truck that looked older than the Camaro. The driver was a small, wiry man in his 60s, with grease permanently embedded under his fingernails and the kind of deep tan that came from decades of working outdoors. He approached the group with the rolling gait of someone who'd spent more time under cars than walking upright. "You must be Sam Crawford," he said, extending a hand that felt like sandpaper. "Frankie Walsh, motor. Chet Brooks said you might need some advice about turning this wreck into something fast." Sam shook hands, immediately liking the older man's direct approach. "Mr. Walsh, I appreciate you taking the time to—" "Motor," Frankie interrupted. "Mr. Walsh was my father, and he never got his hands dirty in his life. What have we got here?" For the next hour, Motor examined every aspect of the Camaro project with the methodical thoroughness of someone who'd seen 1,000 race cars in various stages of preparation. He tested the rigidity of the chassis, evaluated the suspension, geometry, and spent long minutes studying the engine components with growing interest. "This could work," he finally announced. "Kid who owned this before knew what he was doing mechanically. Good component choices, quality parts, solid foundation to build on." Kyle looked relieved. "So we can make it competitive?" "Competitive depends on what you're competing against. This isn't going to be a $1 million Indy car, but for amateur road racing at Oakwood Circuit, it could be a serious contender if you do the work right." Sam felt cautious optimism stirring. What would doing the work right involve? Motor pulled out a small notebook and started sketching. "First, you need to understand what you're building. This isn't a drag racer. You're not trying to go fast in a straight line. Road racing is about handling, braking, and reliability. Power is nice, but it's secondary to making the car predictable and safe at speed. What kind of modifications are we talking about? Engine-wise, you want reliability over peak horsepower. Build it conservative. Make sure it'll run hard for 30 minutes without braking. Suspension gets lowered and stiffened with adjustable components so you can tune for track conditions. brakes upgraded to handle repeated hard stops. Most importantly, safety equipment that'll keep you alive if something goes wrong. Rico had been listening intently. How much of this work can we do ourselves versus needing professional help? More than you'd think, actually. Racing's always been a working man's sport at the grassroots level. Guys building cars in their garages and outrunning factory teams with ingenuity and hard work. Motor gestured toward the disassembled Camaro. The skills you need are the same ones required for good automotive repair. Attention to detail, understanding of how systems work together, willingness to do things right the first time. Kyle pulled out his phone and started taking pictures of Motor's sketches. What about driving? I mean, building the car is one thing, but actually racing it is something else entirely. Motor's weathered face cracked into a grin. That's where the fun starts. See, most people think racing is about being brave and pushing the limits. Really, it's about being smooth and consistent, understanding what the car is telling you, finding the fastest way around a track without exceeding your abilities or the machine's capabilities. Could you teach Sam how to do that? I could try. Been coaching drivers for more years than I care to count. The main thing is starting with realistic expectations and building skills gradually. Sam interrupted. I appreciate the offer, but we haven't even begun building the car yet. Seems premature to worry about driving techniques. Actually, Motor said, it's exactly the right time to think about it. How you plan to drive the car affects how you build it. Different driving styles require different setups, different compromises. Between speed and stability, Lucia had been quietly observing the technical discussion, but now she spoke up. Motor, what do you think their chances are, honestly? Motor was quiet for a long moment, studying the three men who'd committed to this impossible project. Honestly, most people would fail. Building a race car in 30 days requires skills, resources, and luck in equal measure. But these three have something most people don't. What's that? They're not doing it for fun or hobby money. They're doing it because they have to prove something important. That kind of motivation can overcome a lot of obstacles. As Motor prepared to leave, he handed Sam a business card that looked like it had been printed sometime in the previous decade. Call me when you get the engine torn down. I want to see what we're working with internally before we make any decisions about rebuild specifications. After Motor drove away, the three men stood looking at their project with new understanding of the magnitude of what they'd undertaken. The Camaro sat in pieces around them, a puzzle with 1,000 parts that somehow had to become a racing machine in less than a month. Well, Kyle said finally, at least now we know what we don't know. Rico nodded grimly. That's progress of a sort, and Motor seems to think it's possible, which counts for something. Sam picked up a wrench and approached the engine stand. Then let's find out what we're really dealing with. Time to see how bad the internal damage actually is. The afternoon was spent methodically disassembling the seized engine, documenting each component and evaluating its potential for reuse. The work was slow and meticulous, requiring careful attention to the sequence of removal and the condition of each part. By closing time, they had the engine torn down to the bare block, with pistons, connecting rods, and crankshaft laid out on the workbench like artifacts from an archaeological dig. The good news, Sam announced as they surveyed the disassembled engine, is that the damage is mostly limited to the pistons and rings. The connecting rods are bent but not broken, and the crankshaft looks surprisingly good. Kyle examined one of the damaged pistons under a magnifying glass. So we're looking at new pistons, rods, rings, and probably a complete machine job on the block and heads. That's my assessment. Expensive, but not catastrophically so if we can find the right machine shop. Rico was already pulling out his phone. I know a guy who does engine work for the racing teams at the dirt track. Might be willing to help if the price is right and the timeline works. As they cleaned up for the day, Sam felt the familiar mixture of exhaustion and anticipation that accompanied challenging projects. They'd made real progress in understanding what they were attempting, but the magnitude of work ahead was daunting. 29 days to transform a pile of parts into a functioning race car, with limited resources and skills they were still developing. "Boss," Kyle said as they locked up the shop, "are you having second thoughts about any of this?" Sam looked back at the gutted Camaro, then at the determined faces of the two men who'd committed to helping him. "Every few minutes, but that doesn't mean we're going to quit." The machine shop Rico recommended occupied a converted warehouse on the industrial side of Oakmont, where the smell of cutting oil and hot metal hung in the air like incense. Eddie Kowalski had been running precision engine work for 30 years, building everything from street rods to sprint car engines for drivers who measured their success in hundredths of seconds rather than profit margins. Sam carried the Camaro's engine block through the front door, followed by Kyle with a box of pistons and connecting rods. Eddie emerged from behind a massive cylinder boring machine, wiping his hands on a rag that had seen better decades. Rico called about rush work on a race motor, Eddie said, examining the block with the practiced eye of someone who'd seen every possible type of engine damage. "What happened to this one?" "Hydro lock," Sam explained. "Previous owner drove through standing water, sucked liquid into the cylinders. Motor seized instantly." Eddie nodded, running his fingers along the cylinder walls. "Classic mistake. Young. Guys think their cars are submarines until physics teaches them otherwise. Let me check the deck surface and bore measurements." For the next hour, Eddie subjected the engine block to a series of precise measurements, checking for warpage, cracks, and dimensional accuracy. The work was methodical and thorough, the kind of craftsmanship that separated professional machine shops from weekend hobbyists. "Good news and bad news," Eddie finally announced. "Block's salvageable with a complete rebuild, but it's going to need boring to the next oversize and deck milling to restore the surface. Connecting rods can be reconditioned, but you'll need new pistons, rings, bearings, and gaskets throughout." Kyle pulled out his notebook. "How long for the machine work?" "Normal turnaround is 2 weeks, but Rico mentioned this was time sensitive." "I could have it done in 5 days if you're willing to pay rush charges," Sam calculated rapidly. 5 days. For machine work, plus time for reassembly and installation, left them with just over 2 weeks for everything else. "What are we talking about for cost?" Eddie quoted a figure that made Sam's stomach clench, but it was within the range Motor had warned them to expect. Professional machine work was expensive, but attempting to cut corners on engine internals was a guaranteed recipe for catastrophic failure during competition. "We'll do it," Sam decided. "When can you start?" "Soon as you leave the parts. I'll need the crankshaft too, for balancing with the new rotating assembly." They loaded the remaining engine components into Eddie's inspection area and headed back to the shop, where Chloe was waiting with a concerned expression that made Sam's heart skip. At 12, she'd learned to read her father's moods with uncomfortable accuracy, and the stress of the past week hadn't escaped her notice. "Dad, Mrs. Rodriguez said people are talking about you building a race car. Is that true?" Sam sat down on an overturned crate, suddenly feeling the weight of everything he'd committed to. "It's true. Remember that bet I told you about? Well, it's turned into something bigger than I expected. Are we going to be okay? I mean, if it doesn't work." The question hit harder than Sam anticipated. In his focus on the technical challenges, he'd been pushing aside the very real possibility of failure and its consequences. Vincent Stone would collect his public humiliation, the $10,000 would remain a fantasy, and Sam's reputation in the automotive community would be permanently damaged. "We're going to be fine either way," he said, hoping he sounded more confident than he felt. "But I want you to understand something. This project isn't just about money anymore. It's about proving that people like us can accomplish extraordinary, things when we work together. Chloe considered this with the seriousness that had become her default expression since her mother's death. Like when you used to design engines for racing teams? Sam looked at his daughter in surprise. How do you know about that? I looked it up online. There were articles about you in racing magazines, pictures of cars you helped build. Why did you stop? The answer was complicated, involving medical bills and family obligations and the slow erosion of dreams under the weight of practical necessity. But Chloe was 12, and she deserved a simpler truth. Sometimes life requires you to make choices about what's most important. Taking care of you was more important than anything else. But you miss it. It wasn't a question, and Sam realized his daughter understood him better than he'd given her credit for. Yeah, I miss it. But now I get a chance to use those skills. Again, with people who believe in what we are trying to accomplish. Kyle returned from lunch carrying a folder full of printouts from various racing supply websites. Boss, I've been researching the safety equipment requirements. The good news is Motor was right. Most of this stuff we can install ourselves. The bad news is it's expensive. How expensive? Kyle spread the papers across the workbench. Racing? Seat, 5-point harness, roll cage materials, fire extinguisher system, fuel cell, window net. We're looking at about $3,000 in safety equipment alone. Sam felt his optimism deflating. That's almost a third of the prize money, assuming we win. But it's also the difference between a project car and a legitimate race car. And most of this stuff we can reuse if we ever want to build another one. The afternoon was spent calling suppliers and comparing prices, looking for any way to reduce costs without compromising safety. Kyle proved surprisingly adept at finding discontinued items and closeout deals, while Rico contributed contacts in the industrial safety business who might have suitable equipment at reduced prices. By evening, they'd managed to identify sources for most of the required components, though the total cost remained sobering. Sam was reviewing the numbers when Motor arrived with a pickup truck full of suspension parts and a grin that suggested good news. Got a present for you boys, Motor announced, lowering the tailgate to reveal a collection of racing suspension components. Friend of mine gave up road racing for dirt track, had all this stuff sitting in his garage collecting dust. Kyle examined the parts with growing excitement. Boss, these are high-end pieces, adjustable coilovers, racing sway bars, performance bushings. This is exactly what we need. What's the catch? Sam asked, suspicious of anything that seemed too good to be true. No catch. Tom's just happy to see the parts go to someone who'll use them properly instead of letting them gather dust. Racing communities like that. We help each other out because we all remember what it was like, starting with nothing. Motor spent the next hour explaining the installation process for each component, sketching diagrams and making notes about spring rates and adjustment procedures. His knowledge was encyclopedic, drawn from decades of hands-on experience with racing preparation. The key thing to remember, Motor explained, is that racing suspension is about compromise. You want the car stiff enough to handle precisely, but not so stiff that it becomes unpredictable over bumps and curbs. Finding that balance takes experience and patience. Rico arrived as Motor was finishing his explanation, carrying welding equipment and a box of steel tubing. Ready to start on the roll cage? Sam looked around the garage, where the Camaro sat in various stages of disassembly, while suspension components, safety equipment, and welding supplies accumulated in every available space. 3 weeks ago, this had been a simple auto repair shop. Now it looked like mission control for an impossible project. Question, Sam said. Are we crazy for attempting this? Rico considered the question seriously. Probably. But sometimes crazy is exactly what the situation requires. Motor nodded agreement. Most of the best things in racing come from people who were too stubborn to accept that something couldn't be done. The trick is being smart about your craziness. They worked until well past dark, with Rico beginning the precise measurements required for roll cage fabrication while Kyle organized. Parts and Motor continued his technical education about racing preparation. The work was methodical and absorbing, each task building toward the larger goal of transformation. Around 10 o'clock, Lucia arrived with dinner for everyone. Tamales, rice and beans that filled the garage with the scent of cumin and chili. Peppers. They ate standing around the workbench, tired but energized by the progress they'd made. 22 days left, Kyle announced between bites. Plenty of time, Motor said confidently, assuming nothing major goes wrong. What could go wrong, Sam asked, then immediately regretted the question. Motor's grin turned slightly evil. Engine problems, suspension installation issues, safety inspection failures, driver inexperience, mechanical breakdowns, weather delays, parts delivery problems. Should I continue? Please don't. Rico wiped his hands and picked up the welding torch. Then let's make sure we do everything right the first time. Motor, what's the critical measurement? For roll cage mounting points? The technical discussion that followed was dense with specifications and tolerances, the kind of detailed planning that separated successful projects from expensive failures. Sam found himself drawing on knowledge he hadn't used in years. Engineering, principles that had been dormant but not forgotten. As the evening wound down and people prepared to leave, Chloe appeared in the doorway, wearing pajamas and carrying a cup of hot chocolate. She'd been reading in the apartment, but the sound of conversation had drawn her downstairs. "How's it going?" she asked, surveying the organized chaos of the garage. "Better than expected," Sam replied. "We might actually pull this off." Chloe nodded seriously. "Good, because Mrs. Patterson asked me to tell you that half the town is betting on whether you can beat that rich man. She says the smart money is on you." After everyone left, Sam and Chloe stood alone in the garage, looking at the skeletal remains of the Camaro and the growing collection of parts that would somehow transform it into a racing machine. The project had taken on a life of its own, involving more people and carrying more significance than Sam had ever intended. "Dad," Chloe said quietly, "are you doing this for me? Because of the money?" Sam considered lying or offering the simple answer she probably wanted to hear. Instead, he decided on truth. "I started it for the money, but now I'm doing it because I want to remember what it feels like to build something extraordinary. And I want you to see that ordinary people can accomplish extraordinary things when they refuse to accept limitations." Chloe nodded, as if this explanation made perfect sense. Mom would have liked this project. "Yeah," Sam agreed, "she would have." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, father and daughter surrounded by the tools and parts that represented both a desperate gamble and a second chance. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, unexpected problems, and the continued pressure of an impossible deadline. But tonight, for the first time in months, Sam Crawford felt like he was exactly where he belonged. The rebuilt engine returned from Eddie's machine shop on a Tuesday morning that dawned gray and humid, promising thunderstorms. Later in the day, Kyle and Sam carefully loaded the freshly machined block onto the engine stand, where it gleamed with the dull silver finish of precision metalwork. New pistons, rings, and bearings were assembled with the methodical care of surgeons performing. "A heart transplant. Feels almost criminal to get this dirty," Kyle observed, running his finger along the perfectly smooth cylinder walls. "It's not meant to stay clean," Sam replied, beginning the delicate process of installing the crankshaft. "Motors are meant to run hard and run long. Pretty is secondary to performance." The reassembly process took 3 days of careful work, with Motor stopping by each evening to inspect their progress and offer guidance on critical procedures. The older man's knowledge seemed inexhaustible. Proper torque sequences, break-in procedures, oiling system modifications that could mean the difference between reliability and catastrophic failure. "Remember," Motor said as they prepared to fire the engine for the first time. "First start is critical. Let it idle for 5 minutes, check for leaks, then gradually increase RPM. We're not trying to make power today. We're making sure everything works properly." The engine caught on the third turn of the key, settling into the uneven idle of a freshly assembled motor still learning to breathe. Sam felt a surge of satisfaction as the exhaust note gradually smoothed out, the mechanical sounds resolving into the confident rhythm of precision machinery. "Sounds good," Motor pronounced after listening intently for several minutes. "Oil pressure's solid, no unusual noises, exhaust color looks right. You boys did quality work." Rico had spent the same 3 days fabricating the roll cage, working evenings at the steel plant with equipment that could bend and weld tubing to tolerances impossible in a home garage. The finished cage was a work of industrial art. Precisely. Measured, expertly welded, and designed to protect the driver in ways that would hopefully never be tested. "Installation's going to be the tricky part," Rico warned, as they positioned the cage inside the Camaro's gutted interior. "Everything has to align perfectly with the mounting points, and we only get one chance to weld it in place." The process required removing the windshield and cutting access holes in the roof, irreversible modifications that transformed the Camaro from a street car into something purpose-built for competition. Kyle documented each step with photographs, creating a record of the transformation that had consumed their lives for the past 2 weeks. 15 days left, Kyle announced as they test-fitted the racing seat inside the completed cage. "Plenty of time for the remaining work," Motor said, though his tone suggested confidence tempered by experience. "Assuming we don't encounter any surprises." The surprise came the following morning in the form of Vincent Stone, who arrived at the garage, driving a different Ferrari and wearing the expression of someone checking on an amusing experiment. He examined the modified Camaro with obvious skepticism, taking particular note of the roll cage and racing preparation. "Interesting progress," Vincent said, his voice carrying its familiar undertone of condescension. "Though I have to wonder if you fully understand what you've committed to." Sam emerged from under the hood, where he'd been adjusting the carburetor settings. "What do you mean?" "The Oakwood Racing Circuit amateur event requires more than just a car that runs. There are technical inspections, safety certifications, driver qualification requirements. Have you investigated any of those details?" The question hit like a cold slap. In their focus on building the car, they'd paid minimal attention to the administrative requirements of actually competing. Sam felt his confidence wavering as he realized there might be obstacles beyond their mechanical preparation. "What kind of driver qualification?" Kyle asked. Vincent's smile was predatory. "Racing license issued by the sanctioning body after completing approved driver training, plus medical certification, insurance documentation, and proof of racing. Experience or formal instruction?" Motor stepped forward, his weathered face carefully neutral. "Vincent Stone, isn't it? I know your father. Vince Sr. was a hell of a driver back in the day." Vincent's expression flickered with surprise. "You knew my father?" "Crewed for him at Watkins Glen in '73. Good man, respected by everyone in the paddock. He taught me that racing was about proving what you could accomplish, not what you could afford." The reference to his father seemed to deflate some of Vincent's arrogance, though his basic hostility remained. That was a different era. Modern racing requires proper preparation and legitimate credentials. "Which we'll have," Sam said, hoping he sounded more confident than he felt. "What's the timeline for getting a racing license?" "Under normal circumstances, 6 months of training and evaluation. Though I suppose there might be accelerated programs for people with appropriate backgrounds." Vincent's tone suggested he doubted Sam possessed any such background. After Vincent left, the three men stood in uncomfortable silence, absorbing the implications of what they'd just learned. 15 days to complete the car was challenging, but achievable. 15 days to complete the car and obtain racing credentials felt impossible. "Boss," Kyle said finally, "maybe this is where we call it quits. We've proven we can build a race car. Nobody can take that away from us." Motor was already pulling out his phone. "Not yet. Let me make some calls. Racing community takes care of its own, especially when someone's trying to prove a point to people like Vincent Stone." The first call was to the sanctioning body that oversaw amateur racing at Oakwood Circuit. Motor's conversation was animated, involving references to people and events that meant nothing to Sam, but apparently carried weight with whoever was on. "The other end of the line. Good news and better news," Motor announced when he finished. "The good news is they have an accelerated licensing program for drivers with professional automotive experience. The better news is I'm qualified to provide the required instruction and evaluation." Sam felt cautious optimism returning. "What does that involve?" 8 hours of classroom instruction covering racing rules, safety procedures, and track etiquette. 4 hours of practical driving evaluation at the circuit. If you demonstrate competent car control and understanding of racing protocols, they'll issue a provisional license valid for amateur competition. "When can we start?" "Tomorrow morning, if you can spare the time from car preparation. But I want to be clear about something. This isn't just a formality. Racing licenses exist because racing is dangerous, and incompetent drivers get people hurt. I won't sign off on your certification unless I'm convinced you can handle a race car safely." The driving instruction began at dawn on Thursday, using Motor's own modified streetcar on the back roads outside Oakmont. The first lesson was humbling. Sam discovered that his considerable skill with automotive repair didn't automatically translate to high-performance driving technique. "You're fighting the car instead of working with it," Motor observed after Sam's third attempt at a technical driving exercise. "Racing isn't about forcing the machine to do what you want. It's about understanding what the machine wants to do and helping it do that faster." The classroom sessions were equally challenging, covering a dense curriculum of racing regulations, flag signals, and emergency procedures. Motor's teaching style was demanding but patient, drawing on decades of experience to explain not just what the rules were, but why they existed. "Most people think racing is about going fast," Motor said during a discussion of passing protocols. "Really, it's about going fast safely. The difference between those two things determines whether you go home with a trophy or go home in an ambulance." By the end of the week, Sam had completed the required instruction and demonstrated sufficient competency to earn his provisional racing license. The achievement felt almost anticlimactic compared to the mechanical challenges they'd been wrestling with, but it removed a major obstacle to actually competing. 10 days left, Kyle announced as they returned to the garage with the licensing paperwork complete. The final push began with characteristic intensity. Rico completed the suspension, installation, carefully adjusting spring rates and alignment settings according to Motor's specifications. The safety equipment went in piece by piece. Racing seat, 5-point harness, fire extinguisher system, fuel cell to replace the original gas tank. Kyle had become increasingly proficient with the technical aspects of racing preparation, asking informed questions and making suggestions that demonstrated real understanding of the engineering principles involved. His enthusiasm was infectious, driving the team through long days and late nights as the deadline approached. "You know what's funny?" Kyle said as they installed the racing tires for the first time. 3 weeks ago, I thought I knew a lot about cars. Now I realize I didn't know anything about real automotive engineering. "That's the difference between fixing cars and building them," Sam replied. "Repair work is about restoring function. Racing preparation is about optimizing performance." The completed Camaro bore little resemblance to the damaged wreck they'd pulled from Thunderbird's scrap. The exterior had been stripped to bare metal and painted in primer grey, functional rather than beautiful. The interior was a maze of safety. Equipment and racing components stripped of everything unnecessary for competition. Under the hood, the rebuilt engine sat surrounded by modifications designed for reliability under extreme conditions. "It's not pretty," Rico observed, "but it looks purposeful." Motor performed a final inspection, checking every system with the thoroughness of someone whose reputation was attached to the project's success. His evaluation was methodical and demanding, testing everything from brake pedal feel to roll cage. "Mounting integrity, it'll do," he finally pronounced. "Not the fastest car that'll be at Oakwood, but it's well built and properly prepared. Most importantly, it's safe." The night before the race, Sam stood alone in the garage with the completed car, reflecting on the month that had transformed not just a piece of junk into a racing machine, but his understanding of what was possible when people worked toward a common goal. The Camaro represented more than just a response to Vincent Stone's challenge. It was proof that skill, determination, and community support could overcome seemingly impossible obstacles. Chloe appeared beside him, studying the car with the serious expression she'd inherited from her mother. "Are you nervous?" "Terrified," Sam admitted, "but also excited. Tomorrow we find out if all this work means anything." "It already means something," Chloe said simply. "You proved that you could do something extraordinary when it mattered. Everything else is just racing." As Sam locked up the garage for the last time before the competition, he realized his daughter was right. Win or lose, they'd already accomplished something remarkable. Tomorrow would determine whether that accomplishment was enough to beat Vincent Stone at his own game. The morning of the race dawned clear and cool, with September air that carried the first hint of autumn's approach. Sam woke before his alarm, lying in the darkness and listening to the familiar sounds of Oakmont coming to life. Delivery trucks on Sycamore Lane, the distant whistle of the freight train that ran through the industrial district, the steady rhythm of a community beginning. Another day. The garage was already bustling with activity when he made it downstairs. Kyle had arrived early to perform final system checks, while Rico loaded tools and spare parts into the back of his pickup truck. Motor sat at the workbench, reviewing a hand-drawn map of Oakwood Racing Circuit and making notes about driving lines and braking points. "Big day," Kyle said, his nervous energy barely contained. "Everything ready?" Sam looked at the Camaro, which gleamed under the fluorescent lights despite its utilitarian primer gray finish. Every system had been tested, every component verified, every safety requirement met. The car represented a month of intensive work, countless hours of learning, and the combined expertise of people who'd believed in an impossible project. "As ready as we can make it," Sam replied. "How are you feeling about this, Motor?" The older man folded his circuit map and stood up slowly. "Nervous as a long-tailed cat in a room full of rocking chairs. Been in racing for 40 years and I still get butterflies before every competition. Shows you care about the outcome." Lucia arrived with breakfast burritos and coffee for everyone, her usual warm smile tempered by obvious concern. "The whole town's talking about today. Murphy's Tavern is organizing a group to drive over and watch the race." "No pressure there," Sam muttered, but he was secretly pleased by the support. A month ago, he'd been just another struggling mechanic trying to make ends meet. Now he represented something larger, proof that working-class ingenuity could compete with privilege and money. The drive to Oakwood Racing Circuit took 45 minutes, with the Camaro loaded onto Rico's flatbed trailer and the support crew, following in 2 pickup trucks filled with tools, spare parts, and nervous optimism. The circuit was located in rolling farmland 20 miles east of Oakmont, a permanent road course built on land that had once grown soybeans and corn. The paddock area was already busy with racing teams, preparing for the day's events. Sam felt his confidence waver as he surveyed the competition. Professionally painted cars with matching support vehicles, teams of uniformed mechanics, expensive equipment arranged with military precision. The Camaro looked distinctly amateur. By comparison, a homemade project competing against serious money. Don't let the fancy paint jobs fool you, Motor said, apparently reading Sam's thoughts. Half these teams spend more on appearance than performance. It's what's under the hood that counts, not what's painted on the outside. They found their assigned pit space and began the methodical process of unloading equipment and preparing for technical inspection. The official scrutineers would examine every aspect of the car, checking safety equipment, measuring specifications, and verifying compliance with racing regulations. A single failed inspection item could end their day before it began. Kyle had prepared meticulously for this moment, organizing documentation and creating checklists that would satisfy the most demanding inspector. His nervousness was obvious but controlled, channeled into productive activity rather than paralyzing anxiety. "First time here?" asked a voice behind them. Sam turned to see a woman in her 60s approaching their pit area. She was elegantly dressed despite the casual setting, with silver hair and intelligent eyes that seemed to miss nothing. Something about her bearing suggested authority, though her manner was friendly rather than intimidating. "Yes, ma'am," Sam replied. "Sam Crawford. This is my crew, Kyle, Rico, and Motor. Vivian Pemberton," she said, shaking hands with each of them. "I've been following amateur racing at Oakwood for 20 years. Word is you built your car in 30 days to settle a bet with Vincent Stone." Motor's eyebrows rose slightly. "You know Vincent?" "I know his type. Rich boy who thinks money can buy respect in the racing community. His father earned his reputation through skill and sportsmanship. Vincent's still trying to figure out the difference." Sam studied Vivian's face, noting the subtle signs of wealth, expensive jewelry, perfectly maintained appearance, the confidence that came from never having to worry about money. "You're not what I expected in a racing fan." Vivian's smile was enigmatic. "I've always been drawn to underdogs who refuse to accept limitations. Your story reminds me of why I fell in love with racing in the first place." She moved on to visit other teams, leaving Sam with the distinct impression that their conversation had been more significant than it appeared. Motor watched her go with a thoughtful expression. "Interesting woman," Motor observed. "Vivian Pemberton. That name rings a bell, but I can't place it." Technical inspection proceeded smoothly, with Kyle's preparation paying dividends as they passed each requirement without incident. The inspectors were thorough but fair, recognizing quality work regardless of budget limitations. By noon, they had their competition credentials and were officially entered in the afternoon's amateur race. Vincent Stone arrived during lunch break, accompanied by two men in expensive racing suits who examined the Camaro with professional interest. Vincent himself seemed oddly subdued, lacking his usual arrogant confidence. "Crawford," Vincent said in greeting. "Impressive work. I'll admit I didn't expect you to actually complete a competitive vehicle." "Thanks," Sam replied cautiously, unsure where the conversation was heading. "These gentlemen are my associates from the racing community. They wanted to see what you'd accomplished with 30 days and junkyard parts." One of the associates, a lean man with graying temples, extended his hand. "Jack Morrison, Technical Director for Morrison Racing Development. We build engines for several professional teams. I'd like to examine your motor, if you don't mind." For the next 20 minutes, Jack subjected their engine to detailed scrutiny, asking technical questions that revealed intimate knowledge of racing preparation. His evaluation was professional and thorough, free from the condescension Sam had expected. "Impressive work," Jack finally pronounced. "Conservative but intelligent build strategy. You chose reliability over peak power, which is exactly right for amateur road racing. Who did the machine work?" "Eddie Kowalski's shop in Oakmont." "Don't know him, but his work speaks for itself. This is professional quality preparation." Vincent's other associate proved to be a suspension specialist who spent equal time examining Rico's fabrication work and motor's setup choices. His verdict was similarly positive, noting the attention to safety and the intelligent compromises between performance and reliability. "Vincent," the suspension specialist said as they prepared to leave, "you might want to reconsider the odds on this bet. These people know what they're doing." After they left, Motor shook his head in amazement. That was unexpected. Vincent's bringing in professional evaluation, which means he's taking this more seriously than he let on. "Is that good or bad?" Kyle asked. "Depends on how confident you are in our work," Motor replied. "But I'd say it's a sign of respect, which is more than Vincent was showing a month ago." The afternoon brought drivers' meeting, where race officials explained procedures, safety protocols, and track conditions. Sam found himself surrounded by drivers with years of experience, men and women who discussed racing lines and setup changes with casual expertise. His provisional license felt very provisional in such company. "Remember," Motor said as they prepared for practice sessions, "you're not trying to set lap records today. Learn the track, get comfortable with the car, build up speed gradually." Consistency beats speed every time in amateur racing. The first practice session was a revelation. The Camaro felt alive in ways that street driving had never demonstrated, responding to inputs with precision and communicating track conditions through the steering wheel and seat. Sam found himself grinning inside his helmet as he gradually explored the car's capabilities. "How does it feel?" Motor asked over the radio during a brief pit stop. "Different than I expected. More responsive, but also more forgiving. Like it wants to go fast, but won't punish me for small mistakes." That's exactly what we were aiming for. Conservative setup that builds confidence instead of demanding perfection. The second practice session allowed Sam to push harder, learning the limits of both car and track while building the rhythm that separated smooth driving from aggressive overdriving. Other drivers began taking notice, recognizing competent preparation and intelligent driving despite the amateur appearance. "Not bad for a first-timer," commented one veteran as they returned to the paddock. "Your car handles well. Who did the setup work?" "Team effort," Sam replied. "My crew knows what they're doing." Qualifying was scheduled for late afternoon, with grid position determined by single lap times around the 2.1-mile circuit. Sam felt his nervousness building as the session approached, knowing that everything they'd accomplished would be measured by the stopwatch's unforgiving accuracy. "Don't overthink it," Motor advised as Sam pulled on his helmet. "Drive the track like we practiced. Hit your marks. Let the car do what it wants to do. The time will take care of itself." The qualifying lap felt both eternal and instantaneous. Sam found the rhythm he'd discovered in practice, pushing hard but staying within the limits they'd established during testing. The Camaro responded beautifully, taking the technical sections with precision and powering down the straightaways with authority that belied its humble origins. "How was that?" Sam asked as he returned to the pits. Kyle was monitoring the timing system on his phone. 14th out of 26 cars, solid mid-pack performance for your first time out. "Where did Vincent qualify?" Rico asked. Kyle checked again. 8th. Fast time, but not fastest. Should make for an interesting race. As evening approached and teams prepared for the following day's competition, Sam reflected on how far they'd come from that humiliating encounter in his garage 30 days earlier. Win or lose, they'd proven that skill and determination could compete with money and privilege. Tomorrow would determine whether that was enough to collect $10,000. And Vincent Stone's public acknowledgement that he'd been wrong about small-town capabilities. Nervous about tomorrow? Chloe asked. She'd arrived with Lucia and half of Oakmont for the evening barbecue that traditionally preceded race day. Terrified, Sam admitted, but also excited. We've come this far. Might as well see how the story ends. It's already a good story, Chloe said seriously. Everything else is just the final chapter. As Sam looked around at the people who'd made this impossible project possible, Kyle's eager competence, Rico's practical skill, Mota's generous expertise, Lucia's unwavering support, and his daughter's quiet confidence, he realized she was absolutely right. They'd already won something more valuable than money. Tomorrow would simply determine whether that victory could be measured in dollars and vindication. Race morning arrived with crystalline clarity, the kind of perfect September day that made every color more vivid and every sound more distinct. Sam woke in the small motel room near the circuit, his mind immediately focused on the 30-minute amateur race that would determine whether a month of impossible work had been worthwhile. The paddock was already alive with pre-race activity. When they arrived, teams performed final system checks, drivers reviewed track notes, and the distinctive smell of racing fuel mixed with coffee and bacon from the concession stands. Sam felt his nerves settling into the focused calm that came before important moments, not relaxation, but purposeful preparation. Warm-up session in 30 minutes, Kyle announced, checking his clipboard against the official schedule. 20 minutes of track time to make sure everything's working properly before the race. Mota was already under the hood, performing his final inspection with the methodical thoroughness of someone who'd seen too many mechanical failures caused by overlooked details. Oil level good, brake fluid topped off, tire pressures set for track temperature. Everything looks ready. Rico had arrived early to organize the pit area with military precision, tools arranged for quick access, spare parts inventoried, fire extinguisher positioned where it could be reached instantly. His attention to detail reflected the steel worker's understanding that small oversights could have catastrophic consequences. The warm-up session went smoothly, with Sam using the 20 minutes to reacquaint himself with the track and verify that the car felt as good as it had during qualifying. The Camaro responded predictably to every input, inspiring confidence without encouraging overconfidence. Lap times are consistent within 0.2, Carl reported as Sam returned to the pits. Engine temperature stayed stable, no unusual noises or vibrations. We're as ready as we're going to be. Vincent Stone appeared at their pit area as they prepared for the race, accompanied by the same professional associates who'd examined their car the previous day. His manner was noticeably different, still competitive, but lacking the dismissive arrogance that had characterized their earlier encounters. "Crawford," Vincent said in greeting, "I wanted to wish you luck before the race. Whatever happens out there, you've exceeded my expectations." Sam studied Vincent's face, looking for sarcasm or manipulation, but finding only what appeared to be genuine respect. "Thank you. That means something coming from you. My associates spent considerable time yesterday analyzing your preparation. Their consensus is that you've built a properly competitive race car on a budget that most teams spend on paint. That's impressive." Mota stepped forward, extending a grease-stained hand. "Vincent, I hope you race as clean as your father did." Vince Sr. never forgot that winning meant beating people at their best, not taking advantage of their mistakes. Vincent shook Mota's hand with obvious discomfort. "I remember watching him race when I was young. He always said that respect had to be earned on the track, not bought in the showroom. After Vincent left, Lucia arrived with Chloe and what appeared to be half the population of Oakmont. The impromptu cheering section had organized itself around Murphy's Tavern regulars, complete with hand-painted banners and coolers full of food that transformed their section of the spectator area into a community celebration. "No pressure," Chloe said with a grin that reminded Sam painfully of her mother, "but Mrs. Patterson bet her social security check on you finishing in the top 10. "That's not helping my nerves," Sam replied, but he was touched by the community support. These people had invested more than money in his success. They'd committed their faith in the idea that ordinary people could accomplish extraordinary things. The call for drivers came over the public address system, and Sam felt his stomach tighten with familiar pre-competition anxiety. Motor walked him through final reminders about race strategy, track conditions, and the importance of finishing over the need for dramatic gestures. "Remember, this is a 30-minute race on a technical track," Motor said as Sam pulled on his helmet. "Patience will be rewarded. Let the aggressive drivers make mistakes in the early laps, then pick up positions as they fall back or break down." The grid formation proceeded with ceremonial precision. 26 cars, arranged according to qualifying times and waiting for the green flag that would begin 30 minutes of controlled chaos. Sam found himself between a modified Mustang that looked professionally prepared and a Porsche that had obviously seen better decades. "First amateur race?" asked the Mustang driver during the pace lap. "First any race," Sam replied over the radio. "A chatter. You'll do fine. Just stay smooth and watch for other people's mistakes. Amateur racing is about who survives, not who's fastest." The green flag dropped with startling suddenness, and Sam found himself swept forward in a pack of cars, all competing for the same piece of asphalt. The first turn was a lesson in controlled aggression, drivers positioning for advantage while maintaining just enough courtesy to avoid disaster. Sam held his qualifying position through the opening corners, focusing on hitting his marks and maintaining the rhythm Motor had drilled into him during practice sessions. The Camaro felt reassuringly stable in traffic, predictable enough to place precisely where he intended. By lap 5, the field had begun to sort itself out. The fastest cars pulled away from the front, while the slower ones fell back, leaving Sam in a group of evenly matched drivers fighting for positions in the middle of the pack. The racing was close but fair, with passing opportunities requiring patience and skill rather than desperate moves. "You're running 11th, Kyle's voice crackled through the radio. "Vincent's up to 6th, but having tire problems. Just keep doing what you're doing." The Camaro's conservative setup proved its worth as the race progressed. While other drivers struggled with handling problems or mechanical issues, Sam's car remained consistent and predictable. He picked up 2 positions when cars ahead developed problems, then lost one when a more experienced driver executed a perfect passing move in the technical section. "Halfway point," Motor announced. "You're running 10th. Lap time's still consistent. Engine temperature's perfect. Everything looks good from here." Sam was beginning to enjoy himself. The intense concentration required for close quarters racing left no room for nervousness or self-doubt. Only the immediate demands of hitting braking points, finding passing opportunities, and maintaining position against drivers with superior experience. On lap 18, disaster struck the car immediately ahead. The Porsche that had been holding 9th place suddenly slowed with mechanical problems, forcing Sam to brake hard and swerve to avoid contact. The evasive action cost him momentum and allowed 2 cars to pass, dropping him back to 12th position. "No problem," Motor's voice was calm over the radio. "Plenty of time left. Just get back into rhythm and see what develops." What developed was an opportunity 3 laps later when 2 cars ahead became involved in an ambitious passing attempt that ended with one spinning off course and the other limping to the pits with suspension damage. Sam found himself back in 10th place with 5 laps remaining. Vincent's having real problems now, Kyle reported with obvious satisfaction. Lost 3 positions in the last 2 laps. You're actually gaining on him. Sam could see Vincent's car ahead, weaving slightly as the driver struggled with what appeared to be serious handling issues. The gap closed steadily as Sam maintained his smooth pace while Vincent fought an increasingly uncooperative machine. With 2 laps remaining, Sam caught and passed Vincent's struggling car on the main straightaway. Vincent didn't contest the move, apparently focused on simply finishing the race despite his mechanical problems. As Sam pulled ahead, he found himself in 9th place with a real chance of achieving something no one had expected. "You're catching 8th place," Motor announced. "He's making mistakes in the technical section. If you can get close enough, you might have a shot at a pass." The final lap was a study in controlled aggression. Sam closed on the 8th place car through the technical corners, setting up for a passing attempt on the final straightaway. The move required perfect timing and complete commitment. There would be no second chance. The opportunity came as they approached the last turn before the start-finish straight. The car ahead braked slightly early, and Sam seized the moment, carrying more speed through the corner and pulling alongside as they accelerated toward the checkered flag. They crossed the finish line side by side, close enough that only electronic timing could determine the winner. Sam immediately lifted off the throttle, his race complete, regardless of the final order. He'd started 14th, run as high as 9th, and finished somewhere in the top 10, a result that exceeded everyone's expectations, except possibly his own. 8th place. Kyle's voice exploded through the radio. "Official results show 8th place, boss, you did it." The celebration in the pits was immediate and overwhelming. Rico grabbed Sam in a bear hug that lifted him off the ground, while Motor's weathered face split into a grin that looked almost painful. Kyle was jumping up and down like a teenager, clutching the official results sheet that confirmed their impossible achievement. 8th out of 26 cars, Kyle kept repeating. "In our first race with a Junkyard car built in 30 days. This is incredible." Lucia and Chloe arrived with the Oakmont contingent, who had apparently been watching the final laps with the intensity of spectators at a championship boxing match. The celebration expanded to include people Sam barely knew, all of them united by the shared triumph of proving that skill and determination could compete with any advantage money might provide. Vincent Stone appeared during the post-race festivities, walking with obvious difficulty and wearing a racing suit stained with oil and frustration. His car had finished 15th, victim of mechanical problems that money and professional preparation had been unable to prevent. "Crawford," Vincent said, extending his hand with genuine respect. "Congratulations, you drove a hell of a race." Sam shook hands, finding no satisfaction in Vincent's obvious disappointment. "Thank you. Your car looked fast early on. Bad luck with the mechanical problems." Racing's like that sometimes. The best preparation in the world can't prevent every failure. Vincent paused, seeming to struggle with his next words. "I owe you an apology and $10,000. The formal presentation of the check took place in front of the assembled crowd, with Vincent making a brief speech that acknowledged Sam's achievement and his own misjudgment. There was no dramatic transformation of character, no Hollywood moment of complete redemption, just a wealthy man learning to respect skills he'd previously dismissed. As the day wound down and teams began packing their equipment, Sam found himself standing alone with the Camaro, reflecting on the journey that had brought him from humiliated mechanic to legitimate race car driver. The car looked exactly the same as it had that morning, primer gray, functional, honest, but it had accomplished something that would be remembered long after prettier machines were forgotten. "Dad?" Chloe appeared beside him. "Mrs. Patterson says you're a hero now. Is that true?" Sam considered the question seriously. I think heroes are people who do extraordinary things for other people. This was just proving that extraordinary things are possible when you don't accept limitations. Same thing, Chloe said with 12-year-old certainty. You proved that we don't have to stay small just because other people think we should. As Sam looked around at the people who'd made this impossible project possible, he realized his daughter was absolutely right. They'd won something more valuable than money or trophies. They'd won the knowledge that they were capable of anything they were willing to work for. 3 months after the race, Crawford's auto repair had transformed into something Sam barely recognized. The modest garage on Sycamore Lane now bustled with activity that extended far beyond routine maintenance and repair work. Word of the Camaro project had spread through automotive circles, bringing customers who specifically sought out the shop that had built a competitive race car from Junkyard parts in 30 days. Kyle had blossomed into a master technician, his confidence boosted by the recognition that came with their racing success. He was currently under the hood of a vintage Mustang, performing engine modifications for a customer who'd driven 3 hours from Columbus, specifically to work with the team that had impressed professional racing evaluators. "Boss," Kyle called. "Oh, Dundee, Mrs. Henderson wants to know if we can look at her grandson's Civic. Apparently, he's been bragging at college about knowing the guy who beat Vincent Stone at Oakwood." Sam smiled at the continuing ripple effects of their achievement. Mrs. Henderson's grandson had been telling that story for months, each retelling slightly more dramatic than the last. "Tell her to bring it by tomorrow morning. We'll take care of him." The financial impact had been immediate and substantial. The $10,000 prize money had paid off the most pressing debts and provided breathing room Sam hadn't enjoyed in years. More importantly, the steady stream of new customers meant the business was actually thriving rather than merely surviving. Rico appeared in the doorway, still wearing his steel plant coveralls, but carrying a folder full of sketches and measurements. "Got those suspension drawings finished for the Morrison project? When do you want to start fabrication?" The Morrison project was their most ambitious undertaking yet, a complete racing preparation for a local businessman who'd been inspired by their story to try amateur competition himself. It represented the kind of specialized work that paid well and showcased their unique combination of engineering knowledge and practical skill. "Tomorrow evening, if you're available." Eddie Kowalski's machine shop has the engine components ready, so we can start assembly while you're working on the chassis modifications. Rico nodded and headed back to his regular job, one of several people who'd become part of their extended team. The network of relationships built during the Camaro project had evolved into an informal cooperative that shared resources, expertise, and opportunities across multiple projects. Motor emerged from the small office area where he'd been reviewing technical manuals for their latest customer consultation. At 65, he'd found new purpose in helping develop the racing preparation side of their business, applying decades of knowledge to projects that challenged conventional thinking about what was possible on limited budgets. Jack Morrison called again, Motor announced. Morrison Racing Development wants to discuss a more formal relationship. Apparently, they're impressed with our engine work and fabrication quality. Sam felt cautious optimism about the opportunity. Morrison Racing was a respected name in professional motorsports, and their interest suggested that Crawford's auto repair had achieved recognition beyond the amateur racing community. What kind of relationship are they thinking about? Subcontract. Work. Initially, specialized components for their racing engines, maybe some development projects that require the kind of creative problem-solving we demonstrated with the Camaro. Could be significant money if we handle it properly. The bell above the front door chimed, and Vivian Pemberton entered, carrying a manila envelope and wearing the same elegant composure that had intrigued Sam at the racing circuit. Her presence still commanded attention. though Sam had learned to look beyond the surface impression of wealth and sophistication. "Good afternoon, gentlemen," Vivian said in greeting. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." Over the past 3 months, Vivian had become an irregular but significant presence in their lives. She'd commissioned them to prepare a vintage sports car for track events, funding the project with a generosity that seemed motivated by something beyond simple customer satisfaction. Her conversations often revealed knowledge of racing history and automotive engineering that surprised people who judged her by appearance alone. "Mrs. Pemberton," Sam replied. "Always good to see you. How's the Porsche coming along?" "Beautifully. The engine work you completed last month transformed the car completely, but I'm actually here about something else today." She handed Sam the manila envelope. "I have a proposition that might interest you." Inside the envelope were architectural drawings and a business plan for something called the Pemberton Automotive Center, a facility designed specifically for high-end restoration and racing preparation work. The drawings showed a modern shop with specialized equipment, multiple work bays, and space for both customer projects and educational programs. "This is impressive," Sam said, studying the detailed plans. "But I'm not sure what it has to do with us." Vivian's smile was mysterious. "I'm looking for the right people to run it. People who understand that the best automotive work comes from combining traditional craftsmanship with modern engineering. People who've proven they can accomplish extraordinary things with limited resources." Kyle and Motor crowded around to examine the drawings, their excitement obvious as they recognized equipment and capabilities that would transform their work from accomplished amateur level to truly professional standard. "Mrs. Pemberton," Motor said carefully, "this represents a significant investment. What makes you think we're the right people for this kind of responsibility?" "Because you built a competitive race car from scrap parts and proved that skill matters more than money. Because you've created a team that works together instead of a hierarchy based on titles and egos. Because I've been watching how you treat customers and employees, and I believe you understand what this industry needs." Sam felt the familiar mixture of opportunity and terror that had accompanied every major decision in his life. The facility represented everything he'd dreamed of during his engineering days: resources to do first-class work, equipment to tackle ambitious projects, space to teach and develop the next generation of automotive craftsmen. "What would you want in return?" Sam asked. "Partnership. I provide the facility and initial funding. You provide the expertise and leadership. We build something that proves American automotive craftsmanship is alive and thriving in places like Oakmont, Ohio." Before Sam could respond, Chloe appeared from the apartment upstairs, carrying her backpack and school books. She was taller than she'd been 3 months earlier, more confident, with the self-assurance that came from watching her father accomplish impossible things. "Hi, Mrs. Pemberton," Chloe said in greeting. "Dad, I finished my homework. Can I help?" "In the shop until dinner." "Sure, sweetheart. Just stay away from the engine hoist while Rico's working." Chloe had become a fixture in the garage, learning basic mechanical skills and developing an understanding of automotive systems that impressed customers who underestimated 12-year-old capabilities. Her presence reminded Sam daily that every decision affected more than just his own future. "Mrs. Pemberton," Chloe said with characteristic directness, "are you trying to hire my dad for something new?" Vivian's expression softened. "I'm trying to offer your father an opportunity to build something significant, but only if it's what he wants to do." After Vivian left, promising to return the following week for Sam's decision, the 4 of them stood around the workbench discussing the implications of her offer. The opportunity was extraordinary, but it would mean leaving the familiar surroundings of Sycamore Lane for something unknown and potentially overwhelming. "What do you think?" Sam asked his informal advisory board. Kyle was practically vibrating with enthusiasm. "Boss, this is the chance of a lifetime. Professional equipment, major projects, the kind of work we've been building towards since the Camaro." Rico was more cautious. "It's a big step. Success brings its own problems. Employee management, customer expectations, regulatory requirements. Are you ready for that kind of responsibility?" Motor's perspective was characteristically thoughtful. "The question isn't whether you're ready now. The question is whether you're willing to grow into what the opportunity requires. 3 months ago, nobody thought you could build a race car in 30 days. That evening, after the shop closed and Kyle and Rico had gone home, Sam sat with Chloe in the small apartment above the garage. They were eating pizza and working on her math homework, a routine that had become precious to Sam since recognizing how quickly she was growing up. "What do you think about Mrs. Pemberton's offer?" Sam asked. Chloe considered the question with the seriousness she brought to important topics. "I think she's right about you being good at this, but I also think you're scared of being successful." The observation was uncomfortably accurate. Sam had spent years adjusting his expectations downward, accepting limitations that felt safe even when they were unnecessarily restrictive. Success brought visibility, responsibility, and the possibility of failure on a larger scale. "Maybe I am scared. Is that wrong?" Mom used to say that being scared of something just meant it was important enough to matter. She said the bravest people were the ones who did important things even when they were scared. Sam looked at his daughter, amazed as always by her capacity for insight. "What would you think about moving to a new place? Bigger shop, different neighborhood, more responsibilities for both of us? I'd think it was an adventure, and I'd think Mom would want us to try things that might be extraordinary." The following morning brought a surprise visitor in the form of Vincent Stone, who arrived driving a modest pickup truck instead of his usual Ferrari. He looked different, less polished, more practical, wearing work clothes that showed actual signs of use. "Crawford," Vincent said in greeting, "I hear congratulations are in order. Word is you're being courted by some serious people in the racing industry." "News travels fast," Sam replied. "What brings you by?" "Curiosity, mostly, and maybe a business proposition of my own." Vincent gestured toward the Camaro, which sat in the corner of the garage wearing its racing scars like badges of honor. "That car taught me something about the difference between buying performance and building it. I'd like to learn more about the building part." The conversation that followed was unlike any they'd had before. Vincent explained that his racing disappointment had triggered serious reflection about his approach to automotive pursuits. He was considering selling some of his exotic car collection and focusing on projects that required personal involvement rather than simply writing checks. "I want to build something myself," Vincent said. "Start with basic components and create something unique through my own effort and learning. But I need guidance from people who understand the process." Sam studied Vincent's face, looking for traces of his former arrogance, but finding only what appeared to be genuine humility. "That's a significant change from 3 months ago." 3 months ago, I thought money could buy anything worth having. Turns out the most satisfying things require you to earn them through personal effort. By the end of the week, Sam had made his decision about Vivian's offer. The new facility would represent a chance to build something significant while remaining true to the values that had guided the Camaro project: quality work, fair treatment, and the belief that extraordinary things were possible when people committed to excellence. "Pemberton Automotive Center has a nice ring to it," Kyle said as they reviewed the final business plan. "It's not about the name," Motor replied. "It's about proving that American craftsmanship can compete with anyone in the world when it's supported properly." Rico nodded agreement. Plus, it gives us a chance to teach other people what we've learned, pass on skills instead of hoarding them. The transition to the new facility took 6 months of planning and preparation, but eventually, Crawford's auto repair evolved into something larger and more ambitious than Sam had ever imagined possible. The garage on Sycamore Lane became a satellite operation focused on community service, while the main facility tackled projects that attracted attention from automotive enthusiasts around the country. Vincent Stone became their first major customer at the new location, commissioning a complete racing preparation that would serve as his introduction to hands-on automotive work. The project proceeded slowly, with Vincent learning each step through personal participation rather than passive observation. "Funny how things work out," Chloe observed one evening as they watched Vincent struggle with engine assembly under Kyle's patient instruction. "He started out trying to prove you weren't good enough. Now he's paying you to teach him how to be good enough." Sam smiled at his daughter's analysis. She was 14 now, more interested in mathematics and engineering than typical teenage concerns, already talking about college programs that would prepare her for automotive design careers. "Life has a way of bringing people together when they're ready to learn from each other," Sam replied. "The trick is recognizing when those moments arrive." As he looked around the facility that bore Vivian Pemberton's name, but reflected his own values and vision, Sam realized that the impossible bet with Vincent Stone had been just the beginning of a story that was still being written. The Camaro sat in the place of honor, reminding everyone who entered that extraordinary achievements began with ordinary people refusing to accept artificial limitations. The sign above the entrance bore a simple message that captured everything. They'd learned during 30 days of impossible work, excellence through effort, every project, every time. It wasn't flashy or dramatic, but it represented a promise that had been tested under pressure and proven reliable. Sometimes the most important victories were the ones that opened doors to possibilities nobody had imagined when the struggle began. The end. Up next, 2 more incredible stories are waiting for you right on your screen. If you enjoyed this one, you won't want to miss this. Just click to watch. And don't forget to subscribe. It would mean a lot.